What if one man's defiance against overwhelming odds reshaped the fate of an entire world? In the darkest hour of the 20th century, as bombs rained down on London and the Axis powers seemed unstoppable, a stocky, cigar-smoking politician stepped forward, not with a sword, but with words. His voice carried across airwaves and battlefields, into bunkers and boardrooms, giving courage to millions when surrender felt inevitable. Yet behind the lion-like speeches and famous scowl was a flawed, complex man. A man who not only led Britain through its gravest trial but also made decisions that continue to stir debate today. How did Winston Churchill, a man once sidelined in politics, end up changing the course of history forever? Churchill's story is not one of a perfect hero. It's one of resilience, contradiction, and iron will forged through failure. Born in 1874 into British aristocracy, Churchill was far from a model student. He struggled in school, stuttered when he spoke, and seemed destined for mediocrity. But he had one relentless advantage: he believed he was meant for greatness. That belief would carry him through setbacks that would crush most men. Before he became a wartime leader, Churchill was a war correspondent, soldier, and politician with a checkered record. He made bold, sometimes reckless decisions, most notoriously the Gallipoli campaign in World War I, which ended in disaster and cost him his position at the Admiralty. He was ridiculed, blamed, and politically exiled. For years, he was seen as a relic of the past, speaking out against the rise of fascism when others dismissed him as alarmist. But Churchill had something rare: he learned from failure, and he never stopped speaking truth as he saw it. When Hitler rose to power and Europe sleepwalked toward war, Churchill's warnings turned from nuisance to necessity. By 1940, as Nazi forces tore through France and Britain stood alone, Churchill was finally called upon to lead. And in that moment, everything changed. He didn't promise victory. He promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But it was his resolve that mattered. He didn't flinch. While many leaders might have sought terms with Hitler, Churchill vowed Britain would fight on the beaches, in the fields, in the streets, never surrendering. These weren't just words. They were fuel for a nation exhausted by air raids, rationing, and loss. His speeches weren't polished PR. They were lifelines. Behind the scenes, Churchill was tireless, often working through the night in his underground war rooms. He was demanding, often abrasive, and at times difficult to work with. But his singular focus on victory made him a symbol of unyielding resistance. He also built critical alliances, most importantly with U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Without Churchill's persistent lobbying, America's support through Lend-Lease and eventual entry into the war might have come too late. Still, Churchill's legacy is not without shadows. He held deeply colonial views and played a role in policies that led to suffering in India, including the Bengal famine of 1943. His critics argue that for all his wartime brilliance, his peacetime politics were often out of step with a changing world. In fact, after helping win the war, he was voted out of office in 1945. Victory, it seems, did not guarantee popularity. And yet, this setback did not define him. Churchill continued to write, speak, and warn of new dangers, including the rise of the Soviet threat. He was one of the first to coin the term Iron Curtain, foreseeing a divided Europe long before the Cold War officially began. His capacity to see the larger arc of history even in his later years showed the depth of his strategic thinking. There's something magnetic about Churchill's story. He didn't win every battle, nor was he always right. But he showed up when it mattered most, with a spine of steel and a voice that rallied the free world. His life teaches us that leadership isn't about perfection, it's about persistence, vision, and the courage to speak when silence is easier. For anyone facing their own uphill fight, Churchill's story is a reminder that setbacks are not the end. They might just be the preparation you need for your greatest moment. It's not about never falling. It's about rising again and again when the world least expects you to. So what do you think? Was Churchill a necessary wartime lion, or a relic of empire whose flaws should not be forgotten? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this dive into history made you see the past in a new light, like and subscribe for more untold stories of people who shaped our world.